Seed starting indoors can be rewarding, but when problems arise, it can be frustrating. I'll go over the common seed starting problems and troubleshooting. A common problem with seed starting is just the lack of seed germination, and there's lots of reasons that can cause this. One of them is the viability of your seed. Old seed does not germinate very well. The older it is, the harder it is to germinate and the slower it is to germinate as well. So we always want to make sure that we're using fresh, viable seed. Another reason is maybe we buried that seed too deep, and when we bury it too deep, sometimes that seed just doesn't even get a chance to get going and it rots in that soil. Heavy soil medium can also cause seeds not to germinate. It'll stay colder longer, it'll be hard for that seed to pop up through that. So always make sure you're using a light medium when you're planting your seeds. Seeds won't germinate if the soil is too dry, or even if you've watered it in the beginning, the seed germinated, you stopped watering it, and maybe the seedling dried out. So you want to make sure that you keep your seeds evenly moist. Then you also don't want to keep them too moist. If that soil stays soggy, there's a good chance that that seed can just rot and never even germinate. All seeds germinate at different rates. Some seeds are up in a couple of days, some seeds take a couple of weeks. So make sure you're allowing enough time for those seeds to germinate before you give up on them. Make sure your seeds were stored properly as well. If your seeds were stored out in a shed, then they could get too hot and they lose their viability there as well. Soil temperature is really important with starting seeds. If that soil temperature is too cold, then the seeds aren't going to germinate. So put them on a heating mat or put them in a warm spot so that they have a better chance and more success of germination. If your seedlings aren't thriving, they're not growing quickly, they're stunted or they're weak looking, then we kind of got to look at several different issues that it could be. If this was one that was transplanted, pricked out from a larger grouping, maybe I need to push in around the soil to make sure that I don't have any air pockets. Because if there's air pockets around the root system, it's not going to grow actively because it doesn't have that contact with the soil. The other thing is we want to make sure that we have plenty of water for it, but not overwatering as well. Light is another thing that can contribute to it. If it's cold, they're going to be slow growing, so we want to make sure that they're plenty warm. We also want to make sure that it has adequate amount of food. We want to be fertilizing these on a regular basis with a weak solution. And that was from our part 3 of our seed starting series. Watch your seedlings closely. If you start to see a white fuzzy mold growing on the surface, you know you're starting to have a problem. This is usually from too much moisture, standing water like these guys. It can cause dampening off and it cause them to eventually die. One of the things that you're going to want to do is definitely not have them in that standing water. You want air circulation, cut back on that water, and you might want to take a little fork and just kind of work that soil a little bit. This one here we use as an example, and we've got some mold growing on this because it's been in standing water. And if you were to pick this up, you can see that the mold is growing deep down in this pot. This can move from pot to pot because this is a fungal disease, and you definitely don't want this near your other healthy plants because this can definitely spread. Damping off is the #1 problem with starting seeds indoors. It's a fungal disease that starts at the soil line and works its way up the stem, giving it that pinched appearance of your little seedlings. And there's no recovery for this. So the only thing that you can do is to prevent this. These little starts here have dampening off. They've been in standing water. So you can see that they've kind of got a little bit of that slimy look, almost got like a little skinny black stem near the soil line. They're just not growing. They've toppled over, and this is a classic sign of damping off. If you have damping off, you definitely want to remove these from your other starts because this can easily spread. Damping off thrives in humid conditions. If you're growing your seedlings that uses a dome, make sure you remove that dome lid once your seeds have germinated. Also, don't let them be in standing water because this only amplifies that damping off. We want airflow as well. Good ventilation. Run a fan on them. Just make sure that there's plenty air circulation and that your plants aren't planted too densely, so then that also cuts back on the air circulation. Once your seeds have germinated, then allow the soil medium to become moderately dry between waterings. Make sure your seedlings have enough warmth. If they don't have enough warmth, then the soil stays wet longer and the chances of dampening off is higher. So warm environment, air circulation, not in standing water, and you also want good sanitation. If you've had problems with damping off and you reuse those pots, you're just reintroducing that pathogen. The soil you use to start your seeds is really important as well. You want to use a seed starting mix. You want something that doesn't have any pathogens in it. So if you mix your own and you're using your own compost, make sure that that compost has heated up completely, because if it hasn't and it had a pathogen in there, that can just contribute to your problem. Light is another thing that can contribute to damping off. If there isn't enough light, there again, the plants aren't growing actively, the soil isn't drying out as much, and the plants aren't as healthy. So make sure that you have that 10 to 12 hours of light each day. Leggy seedlings, or seedlings that are stretching, are another big problem with starting our seeds indoors. Generally, the biggest problem with these is they're reaching for light. They need light. And they're going to grow long and get thin stems and never be very healthy and be more susceptible to disease. They're just reaching for that light. So we need to make sure that we're providing adequate light, whether we're using a really well-lit window, and generally a house doesn't provide enough unless you're south-facing, or be using an artificial grow light. Another problem that can happen with your young seedlings is yellowing of leaves. If you're starting to get yellowing of leaves, then you might want to give them some food. Just give them a low dose of nitrogen fertilizer or all-purpose fertilizer, and that'll help boost up that green. But if you have been fertilizing, maybe you're fertilizing too much, so you might want to pull back a little bit so that they're not getting stressed by getting too much food. But it also could be caused by lack of light, where they stress out and they don't get enough light. Even in our greenhouse here, we have to supplement on those cloudy days with some artificial light. But another reason is, as they start to get older, they can start to get a little root bound, and they need to be put into a larger pot, because this just stresses them out, or get them ready to be transplanted outside. Distortion of leaves is another thing that can happen with your seedlings. It's not as common as the rest of the things that happen to them, but it does happen from time to time. This can happen if you're using old seed. They just don't germinate really well. They seem to just not have that vim and vigor, and so they'll always have a little distortion of leaf. Now, if you don't have any other seed, then you might want to give it a try. But if you've got other seed that's newer, I would definitely recommend tossing these, because they're going to be more susceptible to pests and disease. Another thing that can cause distortion of leaves is over-fertilization. That stresses them out. It makes them kind of go weird, and they get weird leaf shapes. So make sure that you're not over-mixing your fertilizer. If you're using a type of an insecticide near or on your young seedlings, that can also cause distortion. I don't like to spray insecticide on my young seedlings, because that really just kind of freaks them out and they don't do real well. There is a lot of things to watch for when you're starting seeds indoors, but being attentive will be sure that you have success with your starts. Strive for sturdy, healthy plants, and they'll be less susceptible to pests and disease. If you found value in this video, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, share, and I'll see you in our last part of the seed starting series, how to harden off your seedlings properly. Till next time, see ya.